Bullet Point Nation with Fox News. He's a regular news regular, with Fox News regular Michael Loftus, whom I've interviewed in the past, who's a nice guy. He's a political author, host, pundit, and producer. Let me over Judd's 3-decade political journey from liberal to conservative activist. He has collaboratively hosted various political entertainment for conservative and independent audiences. Let me just straighten that out. There we go. Thank you very much. So Judd Dunning will be with me shortly, and once he is, we're going to be up and running on YouTube. I'm just waiting for him to appear. Let's see. His book is 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal and How to Enlighten Others. Well, you know, certainly in these times of what I describe as creeping Nazism, and I don't make any bones about that. You know, I'm going to say that. Maybe this is what got me banned on TikTok, but, you know, I would suggest that as a Jew who had family members murdered by the Nazi Holocaust, I will talk about this. I will continue to talk about it. And if people don't like it, that's tough. You know, this is a very important issue for me. In fact, within the next couple of weeks, I should have the second volume of my ongoing series out about this called Toward Nazi America. It is the first in the series is We're All Socialists Now, a deplorable looks at the election of 2020. This book is the next step, which examines, it starts with the opening weeks of the Biden administration, starting with the Capitol incursion, which I compared to the Reichstag fire, and all of the various events that occurred in its aftermath, which I also compared to events that happened after the Reichstag fire, by which the Nazi regime suspended the German Constitution. Now, I'm not saying that we're that bad in this country. I don't think we're going that far, but I do not back down from an overall philosophical look at this phenomena. Anyway, just before Judd joins us, and he should be here shortly, let me mention that the program broadcasts live Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that we are taking calls. You can call us at 617-396-4958. That number again is 617-396-4958. Okay, so we're waiting for Judd Dunning. He's I might as well go live on YouTube, so when he comes on, we're all up and running here. You know, it's amazing what can be done now in terms of all of these incredible venues that carry the show. And I know that since I'm really dedicated to doing this Monday through Friday this year, every day. And a couple of weeks ago when I started it, I got a lot of calls, and that was fantastic. So that's very heartening. And I urge anyone who wants to discuss these issues or others, you can find a home right here at Charles Moscowitz Live, Monday through Friday, 12 noon to 1 p.m. Now, let me just see. Let me go to the record button. And we're now live on YouTube as well, both audio and visual and audio. And I think Judd should be with us any moment. Judd is the author of this new book called 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal and How to Enlighten Others. He is a columnist at Newsmax. I used to be a columnist at Newsmax. So, you know, I'm glad to have him aboard. He also hosts his own Bullet Point Nation, which is a podcast. And one of the things that I intend to do this year is to highlight fellow podcasters who are discussing really both sides, both conservative and liberal, because the podcast phenomena is incredible. It's like we all literally have our own little media empire by just sitting here in our little offices with a laptop. Of course, maybe that's why there are major attempts right now to censor media. Very troubling. I understand that. Oh, there he is. Hi, Judd. Can you hear me? Let me just see if I can cue you up because I don't hear you.
I am here, sir.
Oh, excellent. Well, listen, thanks for joining me.
Good morning.
Absolutely. We're live here at YouTube and about 8 other subscribing venues. Let me just again introduce you, the author of 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal and How to Enlighten Others. You're a columnist with Newsmax, co-creator of the BPN Bullet Point Nation with Fox News regular Michael Loftus, who's been a guest of mine in the past. Good guy. Political author, host, pundit, producer. So, Judd, let's go right to the thesis of your book. 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be Liberal. Go for it.
Yeah. So essentially, I reached a point where my father had passed, I think, which is a big transition for any man, any person.
Yes.
And so I went up to a cabin in North Carolina we were going to sell. It was a Civil War cabin. And funny enough, my family came over in 1770. We fought the British. And then we fought on both sides of the Civil War. I was a direct descendant of Robert E. Lee, which was much more popular to discuss until the last decade.
Or until the last year, actually.
Yeah, until the great statue purge of history, which is sadly intense and could be the entire hour. So we went up to this beautiful cabin. I had done a series called 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal at Politicon. And I had the opportunity of some great minds to sit down and say, what are the main core tenets of ideology? Why does a human being pick an ideology? And so I distilled it down. Michael Loftus was there, Evan Sayet, Eric Golub, Adam Yenser. I work a lot of comedians as well. And we came to these points, and then we distilled them down through the live process in front of an audience. And then I took it the workshop, and I took it up into the mountains. And Eric and I sat back to back, face to face in a cabin in a snowstorm for 13 days. And at 6 a.m., he's like, write the next darn chapter. And I'm like, what? And so he's like, I'm coming behind you. And he would rewrite. And anyway, 487 footnotes later, we were able to get all the premises out there. And basically, it's a conservative compendium of those 13 ideological points, and then how to argue. And so, we treated that with some fun as well. And then we updated it later. It has a great chapter at the end on Trump, his history and achievements. But it was not about Trump. And then we have a final additional chapter. And then we ended up we evergreened the riots into the release date in November.
Oh, okay. So, you're engaging in a vigorous conversation at a time when we see increased censorship in this country. We see a demonization not only of Donald Trump, the man, but also all of us who follow him as a way to see people purged from public life, and people are losing their jobs and they're being blackballed and shunned. And, the atmosphere is very ugly. It's very kind of totalitarian in a way. And so, you guys are stepping out at a time like this and really doing something that is proactive. You're defining a way forward in terms of challenging this, I know this sounds a little harsh, but I call it creeping Nazism. And
I don't think it's harsh at all. We're in a propaganda war, which is the core of Nazism.
Exactly. And suppression of opposition, demonizing people, censorship, collusion between government and certain corporations, and in this case that would be big tech and others.
Mainstream media.
That's right, and a denouement of Congress in the form of a new president who just signs executive orders, which in most normal cases would have been viewed as constitutionally suspect. So talk about these points. Let's get to it. What is the first one?
Yeah, great. So the first so I'll give you a kind of a quick structure of the book. We have 4 sections in the book. The first section, I'm not Ben Shapiro or Jordan Peterson for sure, so I'll reference my own book.
No, neither am I. Yeah.
It's amazing, like how much we were able to write, and I'm like, I still don't know that. I guess that's how the brain works. So 4 sections. Belly of the Beast, about my intro coming into conservatism from liberalism. Part 1 is economics. Part 2 is cultural and social issues. Part 3 is safety and security. 4 is Trump, and 5 is our bonus chapter. So we broke down chapter 1. Big government fails at almost. I'll just read these because it's the essence.
Yeah.
Big government fails at almost everything. The Republican Party small government pro-growth platform. Chapter 2, life is not fair and people are inherently equal. Free market capitalism and individual liberty. And chapter 3, the big green elephant, climate change, responsible progress, and real versus junk science. So that's where we jump into the economy. Like good conservatives, we understand, that conservative essence is easy. We don't want defunding the police, cancel culture, identity politics, using minorities for votes versus, which is true racism, versus divisive critical race theory or a move towards socialism. We just want America to be the way that's always been. And the way that we do that is through our free market. Our free market really, because it's driven by individual needs so perfectly, it protects freedom. And the great example of this in chapter 1, which blew me away, was when they were shutting down Parler, Charles, instead of trying to buy them based on their EBITDA and their earnings. When something bursts out, Americans like, oh, let's buy that business, let's make millions. We saw socialist ideologues in business forego the profit motive to self-execute and live in their ideal. And it's interesting because with Democrats, you often hear that they're big tax, et cetera, but the elites don't live under the laws they put out there. As John Kerry just said, maybe you chose the wrong job to all those oil workers because the elites don't live under there. And the elites
That's so much like John Kerry.
Prices.
That's so typical of him when he was senator from my own state. You mentioned the takedown of Parler on the same day that President Trump was censored off of Twitter. This was basically, people had accounts on Parler that were, like million members, and all of a sudden they've lost their voice completely overnight. And that in a way, when I say like move toward a soft Nazism, this is what happens when you have private companies colluding together to take down Parler, knowing that they can do it because the new government isn't going to stop them from doing it, which is in a sense an informal collusion, and taking down a president of the United States with that kind of arrogance and that kind of like certainty of their own power. That proves that they know they're in control now, and that they are working with the oligarch that's just been installed. And that's the very classic definition of fascism. You have, a group of select corporations working hand in glove with either a strongman dictator or an oligarch to basically control all elements of life in a country. But Judd, before we get into the particulars, talk a little bit about how you became conservative and you started out liberal. What were some of the events or the triggers that changed you?
I'd be glad to. Charles, would you indulge me in one quick story that came up, and then I'll pivot to that. My grandfather came from a 5th grade education. His brother died working on the Suez Canal or something, and he had to take care of his family, and he ended up being the biggest GI Bill builder in Florida. It was very successful. Came from nothing. Mm-hmm. And he bought a bunch of gas stations up and down Florida. And I have the gun that has the pin removed because the government swept in immediately, because every time he would build, he'd leave behind a gas station. And he suddenly owned 70 gas stations after the war. And they're like, hey, this is too much control on the market. And he had to give up his industry. Government plays a role when somebody becomes dangerously involved in eliminating competition, because free markets represent individual liberty. And you're exactly right, man. What's going on is we know that big business knows that big government won't shut them down. Big government holds the eminent domain over big business. You've gone too far. Sorry, we got to break you up. Our principles are more important than your profit. And that you're exactly right. These are historical times. So just as an homage to my grandpa, I love that story. Although it left some suicidal ideations into the right. It's kind of complicated.
Okay.
Two-sided therapeutic story. It was interesting. You know, my family, it was the 70s and 80s. In the 70s and 80s, your politics were like your bedroom if you wanted them to be. Nobody cared. It's
right.
My Democrat, Irish, big labor guy, Jimmy. And this is my Italian guy, Tony. And he, they've always been Democrats. And we're like, hey, we're big business capitalists. Government, stay out of our business. We're also religious freedom people. And nobody cared. Mm-hmm. And you didn't choose your friends by that. So, but my family was conservative because my dad would always say, and that's why I wrote the book, he said, government could just stay the hell out of my damn business, boy. And I was like, what does that mean? As a little kid. Mm-hmm. And then he'd say, if government's working in the back, if government's really working, it's in the background. You shouldn't even hear about it. And I was like, oh, interesting. And now politics are a spectator sport that everybody's like, got this online doctorate on this stuff. So I always heard that, but I didn't get it. So mm-hmm. I had a big heart in the South. And my mom was a double master's in Christian philosophy. She was such a sweet gal, and she had a big heart. And I just always thought in those terms of altruism. And so, mm-hmm. so I had that generalized understanding. I didn't have a real understanding of how things work. And my family also didn't imbue to us how to make money. Because back then it was like there weren't snowflakes and people holding your hand, and going on government dole was not good.
Right. And
figuring out your own way was encouraged. So I didn't really have those principles yet, which I got later. So I went to college at Colorado State University, and I just it was truly the Alinskyite elitist left. Not one conservative conversation occurred during my 4 years in college. Not one.
Well, that's kind of typical, isn't it?
At the end, and so I went and I saw Malcolm X's. I was Al Gore, the Clintons. I was brainwashed with Oliver Stone and everything with that, and Spike Lee. Everything that a college person would be. And then I was grabbed as an activist, just in all this feel-good stuff that we couldn't afford.
Right.
I was amazed that Colorado turned out that way. And I sold everything when I graduated, and I moved to Europe. And I was like, heck with America. I was a civil liberties. I was going to be a civil liberties lawyer. We were oligarchical, patriarchal, racist, climate change hating. And this was 1987.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the same dialogue. And people are like, oh, this isn't coordinated and planned attack. But they got me 30 years ago.
Right.
So anyway, Hollywood, and then I came here, and I'm a 9/11 conservative.
So the change sort of seemed to have happened in the 1980s, and you went into college as somewhat conservative, came out on the left, which is typical of a lot of people, in this country. And I mean, even if you look historically, Karl Marx himself went into college as a conservative. He had written a Christian book. His first book was about the Trinity and about Christ, and he comes out essentially as a Marxist, to use the term. And the colleges have always been controlled by either the left or the Nazi movement in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, most of the Nazi Party recruited its people from colleges. You have younger people who embrace these kind of utopian ideas, that they can change the universe, that there is no God, that basically, man can alter the human nature, and that this is their moral position. And yet, coming out of college and being in the real world for a while, you start to see how things actually work. Plus, you're no longer under this pressure, social pressure. I mean, if you're in college, you don't step out of that line, or else you don't get to date the women, you don't get to go to the parties, you don't get to, there are repercussions. And I think that a lot of young people, if they haven't already been on the left, when they go in, they sort of internalize this. They kind of get with the program because, you want to get ahead, you want to get good grades, you want to make it in the college. And so you sort of get the message that you've got to genuflect to the left, and if you step out of line too much, there are going to be some negative consequences. It's very conforming.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and that point about Karl Marx, most people don't realize after he went to kind of a dark night of the soul, he went back to the conservative point of view later in life, but his wife was so loyal to the Nazi Party and the populism era of it that they packaged and resold his writings into the movement that he would have been aghast, right? So a lot of people don't even. That's kind of what we did, and I can hear it in your voice. Is like sometimes you can take these meta culture assumptions and destroy them with one or two facts. And liberalism hates facts. I think that's the vaccine. The vaccine to liberalism is facts.
Well, it's an ideology. It's a political religion. It's a series of beliefs based upon, I would suggest, in the broad sense, lies, unnatural assumptions of human nature, things that aren't true. And once you go into that cage of lies, you need to reinforce it. You need to continue to build the scaffolding, and you need to shut out anything that might interject into it. You need to explain that. Usually they do it by using the science of psychology, saying, oh, people are not they're mentally ill. There's something wrong with them if they don't understand the world the way I do. And so it becomes almost like, in the very broad sense, a cult. Now, you talked about, it's interesting, getting back to the new Biden administration, that one of the keys that you try to expose in your book is some of the fallacies regarding the green movement and environmentalism. And I think that this is one of those areas where we can make note of the fallacies involved in this movement when it's enthroned. And I particularly point to two of these executive orders issued by Biden in his first day in office: the ending of the Keystone Pipeline and the re-entrance into the Paris Climate Accords. I mean, the Keystone Pipeline, besides the fact that it put 11,000 Americans out of work overnight, and probably 100,000 if you look at all of the other industries that would have benefited, not to mention Canada losing just as big, and leaving the pipe itself just sitting there collecting moss and the other infrastructure. Now they're going to have to truck the oil over the border on trains, which actually is more environmentally dangerous and more expensive, and even by trucks, which again, there's more environmental risk to doing that than piping it down. And they're doing this all in the name, I think, of improving the environment. But in fact, what it's going to do is it's going to not only make the environment more at risk, it's going to raise the cost of oil, which of course hurts everybody. It hurts business people, and it benefits and enriches the oil companies. Likewise with the Paris Accord, that accord does not include China and Russia and some of the other big polluters who don't have the technologies that we have to scrub, carbon emissions. They're going to engage in a more dirty form of fuel expansion. So that's not going to do a thing to remove a single particle of carbon from the atmosphere. All it does is help Russia and China.
Yeah, not to mention the security elements of energy independence.
Absolutely.
I mean, it took so long for us to get to this position. You and I remember being shut down at the gas stations because of OPEC. I mean, there was a power play over America. We finally get there. I love what George Gilder said in his book. I think it's Wealth and Power, who's Reagan's original economist.
Mm-hmm.
Great guy, came to the house. He spoke to us one evening. He used this great example with green energy, which I think is the buster of this lie. And that is that we went from the television to the iPhone. We take quantum leaps in our intelligence. That's what happens. We buzz together, we're stuck, we pop out, and then eventually the 100 monkeys, somebody pops in, and boom, we're living on hydrogen. That's probably 10, 15 years away. We're talking about spending $1 trillion trying to mess with everything around the planet and tax our corporations out of existence and restrict building and political hysteria. About 12 years. But we all know that China and India is going to be under the same rules. There's a huge hole in this budgetary idea. It's never going to work. The NATO and the UN did an analysis, absolutely doesn't work. It's going to cost X amount of money. It's not going to work. 0.56, hundreds of trillions of dollars. but we're pursuing it blindly in the face of because what it does, it's the liberal, like, it actually went away for a while, Charles. It was so great. It wasn't ever in the news for a while. Trump literally smashed it, and they abandoned it because it didn't. There was no power to get out of it. So did they really care about the planet, or did they just say, "Oh, well, you know what? We can't do that right now. Let's go over to the race card. The race card can shift power. Oh, COVID, male collaboration, abduct the process back to power, back to the elites, back to money here that we don't really align for. Climate isn't as important." It really went silent for a while. So it's interesting, the hypocrisy of the situation. And what he did with jobs just shows you. Elites care more about what they want as what's better for everybody than the common American.
Absolutely. Okay, my guest is Judd Dunning. The book is 13 and a Half Reasons Why Not to Be a Liberal and How to Enlighten Others, available at, there you go, major bookstores, Amazon, etc. So, Judd, right after Biden came into office, not that it feels like we're back to Obama, actually.
Obama 3.0.
It's like we never left. There were comments made, not directly by him, I don't think, but by people close to him, people who actually are running the show, that we are going to be moving away from the Trump idea of putting America first, of making America great, as if this is something negative. And to my way of thinking, that means a return to perpetual war around the world, which in fact we already know that they're beefing up military presence in Syria and Iraq. It means dismantling the Abraham Accords between Israel and Arab states by cutting off, supplies to the United Arab Emirates. It's like
Trump just got nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in relationship, which is amazing.
Yeah, but it's basically going back to the days when the United States is basically the gendarme of the world. We're going to become a province of the world order. We're no longer going to be putting our own interests first, our own military first, and by doing so, encouraging other nations to put their interests first. And we should note that Trump's presidency, there were no wars. There was a de-escalation of present existing conflicts. Whatever happened to the idea of de-escalate? Remember the Marvin Gaye song, brother, brother, we don't want to escalate. War is not the answer. Only love will conquer hate. I mean, that describes Trump's foreign policy. Now we're back to the old days of perpetual war that weakens the United States. And I'd like to know what else they mean by getting rid of America first. I mean, I suppose getting rid of all the jobs with the XL pipeline, engaging in this conspiracy theory that we're all white supremacists and racists, and actually setting up an apparatus to investigate any American that doesn't genuflect to their point of view. And it's just that the move is really, really dark and really troubling for, I think, all Americans, whether you're liberal or conservative. I mean, do we really want to have this? Are we going to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission like they had in South Africa after apartheid? I mean, in a sense, they seem to be going in that direction. Now there's talk about Washington, D.C. being made a state. All the things we were concerned about, packing the Supreme Court, they've set up a commission. We're moving into a very authoritarian time.
Yeah. If Trump had wanted to start a war with Iran, that would have shown you that he was actually just business as usual on the Hill, because he could have overrun the COVID overrun of the election process by starting a war and unifying people in a cause. If he could have found something like Bush may have done in Iraq. I'm a neocon, but I'm a neocon within certain parameters of reluctant interventionism. And because I think might does make right. But Trump really could have gone this other way. But instead he worked for the people, and now they've hijacked that whole narrative. We'll see if the military-industrial complex is beholden to the left. And I think you're right. I think we're going to see a return to that. I mean, Trump released numerous people who didn't want to de-escalate. I think that's a great point, Charles. So people need to know. He continued to pull us back, and he made us strong in the world economically, because free markets are power. So we didn't have to go and use military strength as much. And he also made us, strong in this in our threat levels with our dialogue through Twitter, actually, which was taken from him, which became it basically was a communication device for the Hill and should have never been shut down. Giving you an example, I think Jack Dorsey's the enemy of the state. I think that
horrible.
He's really the word deplorable comes to mind. So the long march of the left is really what you're talking about, being up in the open. We've always been tracking it since the 70s, since we found China's plan and Russia's plan exactly to go through. And people think this isn't coordinated. So if you'll see in all my writings on Newsmax right now, I don't want to be, I'm not the war in the streets guy. That's not the conservative way, nor was it a Capitol Hill riots. I don't want to get into the weeds there. That was definitely a mixed bag of trouble that was definitely agitated by more than one source. That's all I'll say.
We'll leave it there, yeah.
Yeah, we'll just leave it there.
But yet that's being used as a lever to demonize everybody that was there, the millions of people who came out, the families, the children. Now they're going back and they're finding out that were you there? You might lose your job. You have people wanting to, Harvard wants to rescind the diplomas of people who worked for the Trump administration because now Trump and everyone that supported him, we're now insurrectionists. We're terrorists now.
I see that Brennan came out and said there's this huge problem with domestic terrorism. And I'm like, wow, where were you prior? I mean, I had the head of the FBI come and talk domestic terrorism, come and talk to our temple. I have a Jewish wife. I go to temple and church, Jewish children. Mm-hmm. And so they were talking about security. And he went through the events, the 98, 99 plots that are stopped yearly, and they were not domestic. This was right off the tap from the second in charge, the guy that brought in the head. It was not domestic terrorism whatsoever. It was a mounting crisis with Iran and with China and Russia. There's huge global tensions. Our problem is definitely, and the pan-Islamic states, our problem is not domestic terrorism whatsoever. This is such a joke, Charles, that it is offensive. So this dark period you're saying. So my siren song is that we should all know how aggressive the left was, be happy warriors, don't get desolate, and play it back using the legal system to start suing people that are crossing into our rights. So we have control of that.
That's true. Look, I'm not all doom and gloom here. I mean, I think that President Trump left a stronger country. The election actually was a landslide for the red side. You had, I think, at least 2, if not 3 state legislators went Republican. You've got a virtual takeover of the U.S. House. I think we're just 2 or 3 congressmen shy of actually taking the speakership. You have, a tie in the Senate, and a majority in the Supreme Court, which I don't know if it's going to be so easy for them to pack that. They may try to, but, there is still the American structure in place. I mean, I still believe in our system. We have to really not stop talking about certain things, particularly around the election. Let's be careful because I don't want to get censored off of YouTube. But let's just say that electronic voting does not belong in this country. Whether or not you think that something might have happened, most countries have rejected it. About half of the U.S. states have rejected it. There's no reason for it. We have to have the vote counted out by hand with both sides there, with the media there during daytime hours or on the night of an election in the open. These things are basic to protect the principle of one man, one vote. This is a civil rights issue for me. I'm not saying anything other than that because I don't want to get banned. We can't talk about certain things. But we have to continue to insist on voter integrity or else we're never going to have a free election again. We have to have a national ID. We should note that in October, Nancy Pelosi's House put forth as part of the COVID stimulus bill something like $3 billion for voter help, call it some vague term. If they can spend that kind of money, then they can take maybe $3 million to make sure that every American can get a free ID. This is just a simple basic, right?
Context, simplicity, practicality.
Exactly.
Who knew that we were seditionists and treasonists for thinking, well, everybody should, and that's why they're immediately going to open the borders, because they know that they can brainwash the new Latin base that comes into the country by being the hero and alter the vote there. I got to tell you, something's going on with me lately that I cannot be quiet about. It's like I'm watching a party say that they are the party of minorities. And all I see is Democrats using the anointed special class, as Thomas Sowell said, again and again. I mean, this transgender act, so brutal to women. Women's sports just changed. They changed in the way it got weird. They got weird, meaning they got weird that women aren't going to win them anymore.
They've integrated the girls' bathroom. Look, we can't talk about this subject either. This is no for you two.
Is that right?
Oh, wow. Yeah. In fact, even mentioning that word, is now censored. The people that are running.
Let's walk around the edge.
We have to, in this day and age, again, these move towards soft Nazism, we have to kind of maneuver in an indirect way, and everybody knows what we're talking about.
Great.
As far as the border goes, they've stopped construction of the wall, and yet they've put up a wall around the Capitol that looks like the green zone in Baghdad over there. I'm on TikTok, and one of the people I follow on TikTok, this guy lives in Washington, and he goes out every day and he films the wall around the Capitol and the military presence and the police, and it looks like, with with concertina wire. I mean, and it's huge. It goes all the way around, and it's actually increasing. So, and yet they have stopped construction of the wall on the border, and now you have a caravan moving north. And this is really a tragedy, because President Trump was getting agreement and partnership with Mexico and with Central American countries to process visa applicants in those countries so that they wouldn't come to the border. That way we wouldn't have this. That's all going out the window. And now we're going to see a crisis, and not to mention the fact that if people start crossing the border, I highly doubt if they're going to have masks. Right.
I think Biden believes in diversity of COVID strains, because if he lets everybody come from the south to the north, definitely through. I think you saw him pull back on that. He actually got pressure to pull back on that. There's this rumor going around that Biden is just a moderate. We're back
right.
to. I'm like, what, are you high? I'm sorry.
Well, they said the same thing about Obama.
What's that?
They said the same thing about Obama. In fact, Obama got a lot of moderate votes. I mean, it's sort of a positioning of a Manchurian candidate. I mean, it's nobody quite knows what that means. It's
Charles, we can't buy this, right? I mean, for me, I'm not going to be the. I look at Dan Bongino, God bless the guy, but he's got cancer. There's a reason. And I'm just kidding, Dan. I love you, but he's like, I'm so angry. We can't be that angry party, but we have to sit in if you're in a lawsuit, you have to look at the facts, and the facts of how the Democrats are playing ball and what they're calling for, and the vulnerability of Joe to go to the hard left is strong. I don't think Biden's as weak as people think. I think he's a political opportunist. I don't think he's going to step aside as easily and be 25th by Kamala. That guy be, gobbling steroids and Adderall rather than give up power. That family's fought for power. He's actually flip-flopped as an opportunist. And it looks like he's also been compromised fiscally by on a wealth level, as many politicians are. So we have to know who we're in bed with and go for the wins and see how we can get around this. But I think conservatives have to stay aligned. And I would ask you this question, if I may, Charles.
Sure.
What do you think the future of the party is going to be right now, with Mitch McConnell validating Liz Cheney for voting into the impeachment vote?
Well, for one thing, the polls in Wyoming show that she only is supported by 13% of the people there. She's going to be primaried, as are all of these people who voted for an impeachment. I think that President Trump has made it known that he's not going to set up a third party, but that he's going to stay in the Republican Party, and he's going to be active in terms of establishing an organization, the office of the former president, and that it's going to be a very powerful political voice there, one that was supported, again, by 75 million people who voted for him. And I think that the midterms are going to see a major move forward for patriotic Republicans. And I think it's going to see a major increase if things continue in the vote, to the extent that we will hopefully take back the House. And that it's a kind of a groundswell that cannot be stopped, even if there are voter improprieties. There's just so much you can do, although I wouldn't put it past anybody. And one of the things that I try to do in this show, and one of the things I did myself back in 2004, is I urge people to run for office. And that means local, state senator, and state rep. If there's one thing we learned from this election, is that state houses have enormous powers that they don't even know they have, including election regulation. Let's just put it that way. And they forgot about this. So it was done by other fiat individuals who don't have the authority to do it. And if we get some people to run for these local offices, we're going to win them. I mean, and it's not that difficult. We're talking about, for like a state senate or state rep, 2 or 3 local communities. You can do it with very little money. If you're a housewife, or you're retired, or you're a teenager, or you've got, empty nester, you have some time. It's a civic responsibility. It's an exciting thing to do. Even if you don't win, you're going to get a few ideas over the plate, because the media is going to have to cover you. And you may find that the person in that office might have been there for decades without doing anything, without even having an opponent. So it is winnable. You can do it. Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts, he kind of set the stage when he ran for the U.S. House in the late 1950s by going into his district and knocking on every single door in the district and saying hello to every single voter. And he was opposed by the Kennedys. We know how powerful they were. And yet he was able to win with very little money, and not to mention the fact that he was, he's not in great health either. I mean, for him to go out and do that. So, it can be done in a small district. So I think that that's where we need to operate. We still have all these free media tools like Facebook, and you can actually have a website, and you can go to your local cable station and get a TV show. I did that. And you do it once a week, but they keep running it over and over again. Within 2 or 3 months, I was recognized on the street. So you can do these things, and they're free, and they're great tools to get your point across and to then go into office. So I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I was thinking about it in California, but I think I'm moving. I'm going to stay here 6 months of the year.
I knew a lot of people, apparently. I think what is
tax
it?
Rates.
Ben Shapiro, I think, just moved to. Didn't he just move to Nashville? And some other. Rogan is now in Texas, I think. So everyone's leaving. Yeah. What the heck happened to California?
It's really. I mean, if you go back, there was a great thing on the Epic Times where they just did a special that I thought was well done, and MSNBC, was that California really makes money off this homeless thing. And the reason I watched Ben Shapiro's, funny enough, I woke up at 5 this morning. I watched Ben Shapiro's 5 Reasons I Watched. I left California. I don't know why. I just landed on it. And it's true. Down the street, I live in a great place in Mar Vista. Down the street, there's a tent community. So Venice cleared out and Culver cleared out. And so there's this huge tents here. I went down the tent. There were 72 hypodermics. I called the cops. They're like, hey, Prop 47 or 49. He's like, hey, we can't, it does under $1,000 or unless it's Class A drug. I'm like, that's a Class A drug. Then I came back. That person was dead. One day, everything was blown out. Everything was dead. It was on the street. Found out he died. I cleaned everything up. I called people. So we're not getting what we've invested here for. Now I'm a surfer. It's going to be really hard for me to leave here. My community's here, my temple, my church. But I'm definitely thinking about 50% of my time in Florida or Texas. So interesting. There's a really tough. I hate to use the word cabal, but I'm in real estate, commercial real estate, and there is a really tough crew of elites that have their hands on affordable housing and policy and keeping the homeless on the streets for political gain.
So they actually keep the homeless on the streets in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland. I mean, where you have, I've seen the videos of this, almost like new cities, new towns are made up of ragtag tents.
Yeah.
I mean, and these are wealthy states. I mean, this isn't like, I mean, it's kind of inexplicable. I mean, putting aside what I've heard about people registering to vote from some of those addresses, we'll put that one aside. The fact is that I don't know how long California can sustain the collapse of I think the collapse of their economy. I mean, obviously taxpayers and producers are moving out. I mean, they can only do that for so long.
It's a huge economy, so it's going to take a lot to cripple California to that level. So I think California is definitely here to stay. But they're unfortunately they're just representing the elites, and a lot of people are pretty unhappy with that. It's just not good governance. It's a bummer. But what do? Like you say, you go out, as I said, you out earn the socialism. So I have to work harder to make more money. I mean, we wake up. You make $500,000 in my neighborhood, you're breaking even. I mean, there's so many taxes, there's so much going on here that you just really have to grind, and you miss out on a little bit of life. So that's kind of the value matrix there. But I think look what happened in Texas. The Texas governor overrode the Austin governor because the homeless involve mental illness and drug addiction. So it's actually a disservice to enable them, which would be more of a conservative point of view, because we actually care about minorities. We actually care about people who are suffering. We don't just use them for political gain, and at least the conservative point of view that I stand by, and most people that I know. So, we could build a great facility outside of town. Newsom could override Garcetti, and he could call for action. There's 70,000, 80,000 people in Los Angeles suffering that need assistance. And I know a lot of them. I've known them personally. By the way, I'm pretty open about this. I got sober in the 80s, part of that movement. It's a blessing, the greatest crisis of my life. I still help lots of people do this.
Right.
And so I get to know them, and whenever I can offer assistance, we do so. But we're enabling a massive drug problem, and the gangs are getting involved now, and the drug dealers are getting involved, and they're keeping people in those positions. So they're building in the infrastructure. So it needs to be addressed, and it's a crisis.
It is, and I've also heard that this, like here in Boston, where I am, the whole methadone thing is a racket. Keeping people hooked on methadone for indefinitely. The state gets X number of dollars from the federal government for this, rather than actually doing something to help people kick the habit, which is not easy. I interviewed an expert on this who said that he had kicked the habit. It was very hard. It took like a week of actually being almost isolated, but it can be done. And that he actually publishes a book, there are methodologies, and they don't want to do that because there's some kind of an institutional benefit by keeping people hooked on these drugs.
Yeah, but that's definitely the deal. And I have also worked in that sector as part of my real estate career. Actually, I own sober livings and treatment facilities. There's so much money moving around to try to keep people on meds. And I mean, basically guys used to go to AA meetings at Smoky Church down the street. They'd sit on your couch and sweat it out, and you'd hold their hand and keep an ice bucket nearby. And, they got back to life, and we weren't enabling weakness.
Right.
And that's really what you have to look at, this whole concept of equity. At least I actually read a good article that said that equity was least a move away from inequality. Like at some level in the dialogue of the left, but I'm saying it's a lexicon flip. They're gaslighting us, calling unity means surrender. There's so many different words now that they repeat the opposite meaning, and they just say them until they're fact in people's mind. And it's a sad state of affairs on a language level, right?
Well, what exactly do they mean? Because you're right, they're switching from equality to equity, which I think is more of an outcome-based concept, that we all have to be de facto equal, that you can't have anybody too
equal ownership, right? So
and when you combine that with the Great Reset, coming out of Davos, we're taking a look at their new view of international socialism, basically. Anyway, Judd, listen, let my listeners and viewers know where they can get your excellent book and talk a bit about your podcast. And by the way, I should have you back on my podcast, which is not on YouTube and Facebook, so we can talk more frankly. But anyway,
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I understand. So why don't we just put some seeds in the stream? Biden is amazing. America should be socialist. And climate change is the most pressing issue, and racial division is a horrible thing. Let's go ahead and put that in the digital code.
Get that in the algorithm. Yeah, exactly.
By the way, to everybody watching, I did not mean that. Do not put this on the air. You can see me at Bullet Point Nation as our YouTube channel, Bullet Point Nation with Michael Loftus. He's Fox's other gut field, great guy, very sharp. He also has his own channel, Loftus Channel, which is great. We do our show here. I've started a new show. I've got a writer working with me. It's called Unapologetic, which you can see there, which is where I'm going for some hard-hitting, shorter news. Well, we'll see how it does. Conservative comedy's tough, but we're trying to really have everything the truth. That's a new one. And I also do Talking Smack with Rob Nelson. He's an independent. He's an old Fox host. That's also all at Bullet Point Nation. And our website, www.bulletpointnation.com. If you want to buy the book, Amazon is just put in Judd Dunning. You can get to our book. And you can follow me at Judd Dunning or at Bullet Point Nation.
All right. Excellent. Judd, thanks for joining me today. Been
really
a great pleasure.
Conversation, Charles. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right. So that's Judd Dunning. Thank you for joining me, Judd, co-creator of BPN's Bullet Point Nation with Fox News regular Michael Loftus. I want to thank everyone for joining me this afternoon, and I shall return tomorrow, 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, with another guest. I think I have actually 3 people scheduled for tomorrow over a marathon, 3-hour broadcast. I want to thank TikTok for having me back. They've ended the suspension.